Welcome to the Virtual Shift, a show looking at the seismic changes happening in healthcare with virtual care at the epicenter. Join me and my guests as we look at key cultural and policy shifts impacting how providers, payers, and patients connect, as well as how care is being reimagined both for today and the future. Hello, and thanks for tuning in today. I'm your host, Tom Foley. You can learn more about this show by visiting the program on healthcarenowradio.com, and be sure to follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter at FoleyTom, and the hashtag The Virtual Shift. We have a great guest on today. We're going to be talking about leadership and innovation. Our guest is Todd Dunn. He is the founder and CEO of the Innovators Journey. His mission is to transform healthcare through innovation, and the purpose is to make healthcare a better place for all. Todd, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Tom. Nice to meet you.
Awesome. You talk about in some of your posts, your focus as being a transformation and innovation leader, an alliance builder, an author, a speaker, and consultant. That's a pretty powerful punch relative to what's needed to lead that innovation and transformation charge. So tell us a little bit more about you and your passion in healthcare.
Well, I started with the passion in healthcare, especially the innovation side of it. I grew up in a family business, and so family businesses really have to survive on how they service people and the experience with them. So it's always been in my DNA to pay very close attention to other people from a service perspective. The story may serve as a good example of what kicked me into the innovation space. I was working for, like you have in the past, EHR vendor. And I had this interim role of overseeing development of the new version that was coming out. And so I flew down to Opelousas, Louisiana, and met with a guy named Jared Lordman. He was the CIO of Opelousas General. And we sat down this amazing restaurant, Tom, Prejean's. It's in Lafayette. And we're sitting there on this wonderful bowl of gumbo. And Jared looks at me and he says, "Todd, you make my life hell." And it hit me. Because, like, wait a minute, we had just sold him software for millions of dollars, and here the customer was telling me that we made his life hell. So I had him explain it. And I thought, man, that doesn't seem fair to me. Like, what's causing him to be so unhappy with all the work that we've put in to build something to satisfy him? And so I went on this hunt to try to figure out what was causing this just disdain that continues to this day, I believe, for EHRs. And so I started doing a lot of homework and found great companies, did a lot of reading with Clay Christensen and others to try to figure out how do you actually build products and services that delight people. And my MBA is in supply chain management. I was an operator, and I just thought, you know what, I want to do something different. I hate the fact that we're not satisfying the people who are using our products. And so that's kind of kicked me into the innovation space. Me as a person, grew up in the South. I'm the Southern Georgia boy, finished high school in Louisiana, have 3 kids. We're empty nesters now. But my real passion is just helping things run better. And I think innovation is a verb, not an outcome. I think transformation is the outcome. So I come at it with a little bit of a different angle, maybe because I've always thought in terms of a system. That's me. I love it. I think we have a sacred responsibility, as Albert Einstein said, to be the best we can be, and what better area or industry to do that in than healthcare.
Yeah, you really have to have a passion for people and helping them want to achieve a different state of life, and it's a very, very challenging task. But to your point, many CEOs, based on recent research, say that they know that innovation is essential, but a very low percentage are happy with their programs. What do you believe is causing that?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. I think maybe they're not happy with their programs because of the hype and promise of innovation, and they have this shiny object kind of point of view that they hope turns into something meaningful, but it often doesn't deliver the promise. I think for so long we've had innovation kind of as a reputation metric versus an impact metric. Another reason I think they're disappointed with it is because they don't have systems in place that make it a repeatable, structured, rigorous process. And it's not on many C-suite agendas from a standing rigor, what's going on with it, what's the system producing for us. I think historically they've created maybe innovation as a culture commitment and they put a person in charge of innovation, but it's viewed differently than the rigor of, say, supply chain or clinicians or even, frankly, finance. And so I don't think you can really be happy with the outcome of something that you can't describe. I'll give you an example. So when I started with one company, I interviewed 73 people as my onboarding. And I asked all 73 people, Tom, if I were to ask 100 top leaders in the organization what their definition of business model is, which is an innovation vector, how many different answers would I get? Every one but one person told me 100. One person told me 102. And I said, okay, that's a problem. If they're all being pushed to do it, but no one has the same definition, then it's like the Tower of Babel. Then I asked the question, of those 100 people, how many of those do you believe have heard the term or spoken the term business model innovation in a meeting? Again, the answer was unanimous. Every one of them. And if you just look at the dichotomy from the expectation to the clarity of understanding, but yet the repetitiveness of the topic, there's such a disparity that it just tells you there's not a system in place. And how could any CEO be happy with that if she or he doesn't have a system in place where they can really understand it? Imagine, for instance, you go to the hospital and you have sepsis. If they didn't have a system for improving sepsis outcomes. And when we think about the rigor of medicine compared to the rigor of innovation, it's an odd thing, right? We're trying to innovate for healthcare without a system in place. So I think that's why they're not happy with it, but they see it as essential because they know the world's rapidly changing around them. And that's, I think, where the gap comes from, is because they just don't have repeatable systems in place in most systems.
No repeatable systems in place. And do you think extraordinary, well, I'll just refer to it as extraordinary investments on the EHR side and an EHR vendor, to your point where you started this conversation, is really, if they're not innovators, and they're not willing to accept third-party integration, because people get penalized, or that third party innovator has to pay some percentage of the revenue for that integration piece. Do you think that is in and of itself part of the inability of health systems to truly be innovative?
Yes, I'll explain why. It's just like with AI now. It's sucking the oxygen out of the room in the conversation, and it's sucking the budgets. And so I think when we look at an EHR as the backbone of innovation, I think we often forget that that actually should be almost invisible to the people who use it. It becomes such an anchor in the topic that I think we need to do those. But to give it all the energy that it gets, I think, is often unnecessary, because in reality, EHRs don't help health systems compete. It doesn't really help them stay healthy from my perspective. It's the business model, and that EHR is just part of orchestrating the business of healthcare. But yes, I think it sucks the energy out of budgets and attention, when in reality, if we have more of a portfolio way of thinking about transformation and that being an element of it, it wouldn't consume so much.
What's your advice to organizations who are trying to transform and stay ahead?
Oh man, you got to put a system in place, Tom. If we sit back and we say, okay, Dr. Brent James, you may remember him. He's like the quality guru at Intermountain Healthcare. Was good friends with Don Berwick, still is. I took a class from him in 2012, and he talked so much about an innovation, clinical process model. It was clear how you create one, how you renovate one, the whole bit. And I thought, wow, clinical process models, language, tools, and methods. Well, why don't we have a transformation process model? One that's clearly understood with language, tools, methods, and education for leaders. So the first thing I would do is to establish a transformation process model. My good friend David Duncan framed this up pretty well. He talked about strategy, pathways, portfolios, and people. And I edited a little bit, but there has to be clarity around what does transformation mean. And then there has to be clarity around, well, how do you deliver it? And to me, that's the innovation playbook, and a structured, process-oriented evidence way of what people are supposed to do to deliver the transformation. Within that, you start looking at the business model as the unit of competition. You can almost call that the big T of transformation. And
Hmm.
then you look at processes as maybe the small part that's necessary. But man, you got to have a documented system. I mean, can you imagine a CFO walking in a room with his peers and the CEO, and they say, hey, how do we set budgets this year? And they couldn't show you. They couldn't show you the calendar. Or if the chief medical officer comes in and says, hey, what are we doing about quality in cardiology? And all they could do is hand wave and say some fluffy words, but they couldn't show you how they drive with evidence. It's almost unfathomable to think that that would happen. And so why is it maybe that systems don't have that same level of rigor and clarity around transformation and innovation? So my advice would be is to demand the same level of rigor and focus and commitment to transformation as you have in the other areas of the company.
Yeah, you actually used a very key word with evidence,
Mhm.
and I often feel like there's a lot of shiny objects that are hanging in front of folks, and
Yes.
they're attracted to those shiny objects because they might do a lot of good marketing, but
Yeah.
good marketing doesn't translate into an evidence-based platform or an evidence-based service, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you get tied up in this, geez, I had such great expectations because of how they presented themselves, but I lost it on the implementation because I don't really have evidence. And I always believe, whether you're in fee for service or value based care, in this virtual world of remote patient monitoring and things of that nature, chronic care
Mhm.
management, you can. I personally believe you can achieve value based on
Mhm.
evidence in a fee for service world just as much as you can achieve it in a value based care world. You
Of course.
just need to have, to your point, plan, a model, and sustainability in committing to what it is you're trying to achieve. And ultimately, it's not what you do. Maybe let me restate that. It is what the health system does, but just as important, the one stakeholder that is often not talked about is, what do I have to do? I'm a
Yeah.
patient. I'm a
Yeah.
member. I'm a
Yeah.
to your our previous conversation. I'm a person, right?
Mhm.
I'm the one with the healthcare problem, right? You're just
Yes.
so, and I'm not in front of you 24/7. So
Yes.
so the innovation that
Mhm.
a healthcare system wants to impose, it doesn't come. It has to be translated for me as the patient. What are your thoughts on that?
Boy, a little to unpack there. You said some great things. The rigor of medicine. If we just look at the theory of medicine, cell theory, germ theory arguably is why you have vaccinations today. You know, Pasteur created the first vaccination, it was rabies. But he had this theory of why germs expand. But the beauty of a theory is that you admit you don't know. And I think a lot of times with innovation, we prescribe before we diagnose. And so then you go back to this notion of medicine uses the rigor of the scientific method. You have an assumption, you design an experiment, you run a test, you get evidence to insight to validate or invalidate what you believed in the beginning. And I often believe that innovators or the innovation kind of community jumps into prescribing based on assumptions. Look at Theranos. I mean, there's so many examples of where we prescribed. I'll give you a great example. Back in my past life, we had a nurse come to our lab and say they needed a watch or a band to remind them to wash their hands. And so, of course, in this service or innovation oriented mindset, we knew how many watches were sold every year in the world and blah, blah, blah. So we built a watch. But what we didn't ask is what has to be true for the watch to deliver the value that the nurse seeks. If we would have asked the key assumption, you know what the key assumption was? That people would wear a watch. The other assumption was that they could wear a watch. And when we went and observed in hospitals, you find out that they can't wear one in any ICU or any OR, which is the most dangerous place for germs. And so we had this big hype excitement, but what we didn't have, as we spoke about earlier, is this rigorous system to say, let's go back to the fundamentals of medicine, let's write down our assumptions. And so we have so many assumptions about people and about what they do in their world that just aren't valid. So, what would I do? You asked me about the patient role in this. I think a good example of a couple companies that I admire a lot. IKEA has a program called Life at Home. They go into hundreds of homes each year. They interview 20-something thousand people to understand how people live, where they live. And so they go into these homes and they do research, all to build furniture that, Tom, you and I got to put together ourselves. And Intuit has a program called Follow Me. And their employees have to go to places where people use their solutions. They go do taxes around the table. They go to pizza shops. They immerse themselves. One of the greatest stories ever is Lego's turnaround. Lego was suffering because they were building all this stuff that they believed parents and kids wanted. And then they decided, wait a minute, we don't really understand this like we should. So they literally embarked on the largest study ever done in how children play. Where did they go? They went into homes and they interviewed parents and they played with kids and they started designing around what progress people wanted to make, turn their company around. The reason that I bring that up is you and I were talking earlier. I think on average, a patient may spend at best 15 hours a year with their clinical team. But guess where that is? That's at the doctor's office. It's in the hospital.
It's in the brick and mortar. Yeah.
8,760 hours in a year. So all the other time they're at home. And so what would I do? I would go back to another principle of medicine. It's observations. It's what the great consumer companies do. So why don't we create an effort and a requirement of people making decisions about those people to go into their homes, to go to their workplaces, to spend time in ORs and ICUs with doctors before they make a decision? I literally think it's the application of medical principles to drive better decisions. And it's only innovative, effectively innovative if the person experiencing it loves it.
Exactly.
You're not innovating just to say you're doing something. But I would change it. I would go to where they are, Tom.
Yeah, I listen. As you know, I'm very involved in remote patient monitoring, chronic care management, and we do a number of self-monitoring of how we deliver services. And when you're on the phone and you hear a patient say that the care manager is their angel, it really translates to they didn't say they liked it; they loved this person because there's a relationship there, right? And I think that instead of talking about remote patient monitoring, chronic care management, it should be about what's the underlying patient engagement strategy, right? Regulatory says, hey, you got to take your measures 16 times in a given month. So a lot of RPM companies, they just give me my measures. But did I change, right? What did the 16 measures tell me? How did I change the care plan? Or the engagement based on what I learned about this patient. So it's not just about the regulatory steps. It's really about the outcomes and the evidence of that outcomes. And if you can't report on that, you can say that you're, one RPM company would say, hey, I'm 70% compliant in my 16-day measures. That's terrible, by the way. But the point is, you don't learn much from that. Right? The patient doesn't shift. You got to shift. This is what the whole virtual shift is about. You got to shift the market and you got to shift the understanding of the patient or in order to provide better care. That's the whole point of these virtual programs and this innovation is to shift the attention of care. You and I spoke before the call, with between my parents and my in-laws, we have we're in that sandwich generation, if you will. It's just mind-boggling. As my audience knows, I've always told my mother it was a good thing she had 6 kids because she had 6 different caregivers. But for those folks, so I often wonder, geez, those folks that don't have that tight knit fabric in their support system, how do they make it? Because you can walk into a health system and you can be told a lot of stuff, and if you don't understand it, you're not going anyplace. You're just a product of a reimbursement, frankly.
You bring up a really interesting point. Scott Cook was the founder of Intuit, and I had the privilege of spending a little bit of time with him, and he brought up this notion of the different measures. So he brought his top 300 leaders into a room, he told me, and he told them all to bring their dashboards of what they were measuring, and he put highlighters on every table. This is just a great story. And he told them to highlight everything on their dashboard that the customer truly cared about in their day-to-day lives. And I said, what happened? And he said, Todd, there was very little highlighting going on, and it hit me that we had a problem. He said, or an opportunity, however you want to frame it, I think it's a problem. He said, we were not measuring because we did not understand what people really cared about in their day-to-day lives and what was causing them to hire into it. He and Clay Christensen call that a customer benefit metric. I call it a love metric. Like, if you were to hire our solution, our RPM solution, what would you love to have as a result of that? Okay. And we don't know those. We don't reflect those dashboards inside of healthcare systems. So, for instance, someone walks in, they say, "Hey, Tom, you asked me, I'm your patient. Hey, Todd, you need to lose weight." Yep, I know. Hey, Todd, how many pounds do you want to lose? 20. And we write down 20. But what if you were to ask me, Todd, what would be important about you losing 20 pounds? And I may say, I can get back into my suit for my daughter's wedding. Whatever I'm measuring. Or, I really want to get this wound healed so I can go back to playing pickleball, or so I can go back to bingo, or go back to golf, or do dinner dates with friends again. The reason that I bring that up is I think you bring this up. I call it the 3 C's of design disease: conference rooms, conference calls, and cubes. So we bring people out of their context into ours. And we ask them to describe in gory detail what's happening in their lives that we need to design to. But you mentioned it with your company. You go into the homes and you understand, and you're like, well, what's important about this to you? Well, I don't have to drive to the doctor. Well, what's good about that? Well, it saves me an hour and a half a day. Okay, well, what's good about that? Well, right now, my job doesn't pay me when I leave, and I really can't afford the gas. So is it about the visit, or is it about them saving an hour and a half away from work and the money for gas? And so you're spot on. I just think that sometimes we push our products and services into their lives versus designing it to where they will pull it into it. And it's just the approach. Look, I think our nurses, our doctors, our engineers designing for those people are amazing people. They are. They're amazing.
Agreed.
I just don't think we've put the right systems and measures in place to help them be as amazing as they want to be.
I absolutely agree. And I absolutely agree. And they that front line is they see it every day, right?
Oh,
And they have that compassion and that empathy for that patient, but sometimes the overall system works against them, and they can only do what they can do.
yeah.
Um, but so is that not the transformation? Is that not, is transformation a technology, or is transformation a thought process in which
Mhm.
uh, the end customer realizes a transformed approach on how they are engaged, and does the patient need to transform and be innovative in the context of behavioral change, right? Stop eating that fried chicken, and so forth. If I truly want to lose weight, right? As an example, I use weight because my father's history, but the point there is that obesity is, in my view, one of those key elements. But what are your thoughts on my thoughts on where innovation is, and what it is, and where it sits?
You're spot on. Every one of your comments has brought it back to the person experiencing it. Whether you mentioned a story earlier to me to where a doctor came into the room with your mother-in-law, and imagine that doctor's life during the day. She or he is so busy and slammed. And maybe the design of the tools and the software that she or he uses doesn't understand the context of the demands of their day. And so it causes a burnout. Or take, for instance, the patient you mentioned who isn't eating well. And we tell them, you got to eat well. Well, they probably know that. But do you know that Procter & Gamble, here's one for you, blow your mind. They have this, for a long time, they had consumer as boss as a strategy, and living it and working it as the program. So the people designing their products had to go live with people in their homes or work with people in their shops to know how it was being sold, why it was being bought, why it wasn't being bought. And Richard Desmier is a friend of mine at P&G. Do you know that they go into homes and do windows and floors and laundry with people? They go to understand what's causing them to buy Tide or not buy Tide. And then they have this thing, Tom blows my mind. He told me about this. They call it, Kathy Fish, who was their chief innovation officer, told me this, deprivation testing, where they will give you their competitor's product. And if you don't come back to Tide, they know they haven't built a superior experience and product. The reason that I bring this up is those great consumer companies put that person's experience at the core of everything they need to understand. And so you bring up a perfect point. I believe, just like you suggested, that we need to put the systems in place that demand the people in administrative and decision spots for services or products for the people in the context that they have to go see. If you're an administrator that hasn't spent time in the OR, the ICU, or in a patient's home, or in a general practice office, I don't think you should be making decisions for those people who live there, work there, pray there, play there, whatever. I just think we have to flip it. Great consumer companies have done it.
Yeah. Todd, we're going to have to leave it there. Todd Dunn, founder and CEO of the Innovators Journey. You can find him on LinkedIn at Dunn Todd, DUNNTODD. Todd, thank you for being a guest on the program. You're welcome back at any time.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate connecting with you.
That's today's shift. I appreciate the audience taking the time to tune in. If you missed part of today's episode, you can tune back in at the healthcarenowradio.com at the same time, 11 a.m. or 7 p.m. Eastern throughout the week. And be sure to check out the program page at thevirtualshift.co. As well, remember to follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter at FoleyTom, and follow the show's hashtag, TheVirtualShift. I'm Tom Foley. Until the next shift.